Imagine cramming a nuclear bomb into a shoebox. That is basically what a handful of lunatics did to cars back in the 60s and 70s. And by the time this video is over, you're going to wish you were alive to buy one of these things brand new off a dealer lot. There is an old unwritten rule in the car world. A formula so simple, it sounds almost stupid when you say it out loud. Take the biggest engine you can possibly get your hands on and shove it into the smallest, lightest car that can physically survive the abuse. Big engine plus tiny car equals absolute chaos. And that chaos is exactly why some of the most insane machines in automotive history exist. Detroit had plenty of big engines during the muscle car golden age, sure, but most of those monster V8s went into giant land yacht sedans that weighed more than a small house. It took a special, slightly unhinged breed of engineer, dealer, and backyard tuner to look at those same engines and think, why not put this into the smallest car we can find instead? Today, we are counting down 8 of the craziest small cars with the biggest engines ever bolted into them. And I promise you, by the time we get to number 1, your jaw is going to be on the floor. Because that final car is legitimately one of the most unhinged builds in automotive history. So buckle up, because this list only gets crazier from here. Let's kick things off at number 8 with the Sunbeam Tiger, because this one perfectly sets the tone for everything that is about to happen on this list. Back in 1964, a British company called the Roots Group had a genuine hit on their hands with a car called the Sunbeam Alpine. It was a gorgeous little roadster, light as a feather, stylish as anything coming out of Europe at the time, and it had one massive problem. Under that pretty little hood sat a weak, wheezy inline 4-cylinder engine with less than 2 liters of displacement. If Roots wanted this car to actually compete on a global stage, that anemic little engine simply was not going to cut it. So they did what any smart company facing this exact problem would do. They called the one man on the planet who had already proven he knew exactly how to fix it. Carroll Shelby. And Shelby did what Shelby always did best. He ripped out that sad little 4-cylinder and dropped in a small block Ford V8. The result was the Tiger. And from 1964 through 1967, Rooties built 2 versions of it. The Mark I with the 260 cubic inch V8, and the Mark II with the bigger 289. That larger engine rocketed the 2,600-pound Tiger to 60 miles an hour in a claimed 7.5 seconds, and it was well on its way to 120-mile-an-hour top speed. But here is the thing, those numbers were actually conservative. A 2,600-pound car with a well-sorted 289 under the hood was an absolute riot. And with better tires, it would have blown those factory numbers out of the water. You have to understand just how tiny this car really was. We are talking an 86-inch wheelbase and a width of just over 60 inches, meaning if you laid down flat, you would actually be taller than the car is wide. Roots built about 7,000 Tigers over 4 years, and this little beast earned its stripes on track too, making a real attempt at the 1964 24 Hours of Le Mans, and a race-tuned Tiger actually took first place in its class at the 1965 Daytona Continental. It even found fame on the big screen, showing up in shows like Get Smart. But then in 1967, the Roots Group collapsed and Chrysler swooped in and bought them out. And that was the end of the Tiger, which honestly stings, because by the standards of what is coming later on this list, those Ford V8s crammed into the Tiger were actually on the small side. This car was just getting started when it got killed off. Now, number 7 takes us to a company that most people have completely forgotten about. But trust me, what they built deserves way more respect than it gets. The Studebaker Superlark. In the early 60s, Studebaker was doing genuinely wild, outside-the-box stuff in the car world. Remember the Avanti, that fiberglass rocket that was trading punches directly with the Corvette. But here's the catch. Studebaker was never a cash-rich company. They were constantly scrambling, constantly fighting just to survive in an industry dominated by giants. So for their next big performance move, they took their small, boring, forgettable little economy car, the Studebaker Lark, and crammed as much Studebaker V8 into it as they possibly could, then bolted on a supercharger for good measure. Keep in mind, forced induction on a production car was still bleeding edge, borderline experimental technology in the early 60s. The engine in this new Lark R2 was not even a huge displacement motor, just 289 cubic inches. But thanks to that Paxton supercharger strapped to it, it was pumping out a genuinely impressive 300 horsepower and 303 foot-pounds of torque, at just 3,350 pounds, sitting on a 109-inch wheelbase. The Lark is technically one of the bigger cars on this whole list, But remember, this thing hit the market before the entire pony car genre even existed. This was a sub-14 second quarter-mile machine, and it was incredibly rare, with only 325 Larks ever getting that R2 supercharged engine, and just 53 of those receiving the full Super Lark treatment. And Studebaker was not done pushing the envelope, because their follow-up R3 package shoved in a 305 cubic inch motor that made up to 335 horsepower and 320 foot-pounds of torque. In a car that was even lighter, just over 3,000 pounds. Those R3 cars are rarer still, with only around 125 ever built. This one last performance hurrah from Studebaker was genuinely awesome, but it was not enough to save the company. Studebaker shut down their South Bend factory at the end of 1963. The Canadian plant limped along a couple more years, and by 1966 the company was finished. But for that one brief, brilliant moment when Studebaker jammed a blown V8 into their smallest, cheapest car, they built something truly special, and this list only gets more insane from here, so do not go anywhere. Number 6 takes us all the way to South Africa for the Basil Green Capri. And if you do not know who Basil Green was, picture him as the South African version of Carroll Shelby. I have actually made full videos on this man before, because his story deserves its own spotlight. But let's focus on this specific car right now. Green was already building the Capri Piranha V6, a rare, hotted-up version of Ford's little Capri Coupe. But by 1970, he decided the V6 simply was not enough anymore, so he ripped it out and shoved in a Ford Windsor small block V8 instead. And this was not just any small block. This was a Hypo 289, the exact same engine you would have found under the hood of a K-Code Mustang GT back in the United States. And here's where things get genuinely clever. Basil Green swapped out the heavy iron intake manifold and bell housing for lightweight aluminum parts, and through careful, obsessive weight management, he managed to keep these V8-powered Capris nearly identical in weight to the standard Capri 3000, despite packing an engine with 2 extra liters of displacement and dramatically more performance. The finished car weighed only about 2,500 pounds, making it considerably lighter than its Mustang counterparts back home. On paper, the numbers show a mid-14 second quarter mile and 0 to 60 in around 6 seconds. But honestly, those figures undersell how quick this thing actually felt. Stuffing a 289 Hypo engine into a 2,500-pound car is going to feel blisteringly fast, no matter what. Whether it is a stock 271 horsepower unit, or a more heavily worked Shelby-style motor pushing closer to 300 horsepower. Green built roughly 400 of these V8-powered Capris before Ford's South African plant stopped producing the Mark I Capri in 1972, cutting off his entire supply chain of donor chassis and parts overnight. Now here's a fun twist, because our next car used almost the exact same recipe as the Basil Green Capri, but with a completely different engine, a completely different manufacturer, and an even crazier backstory. So stick around. At number 5, we have the Can-Am Piranha, another South African monster. And this one came straight from General Motors in 1973. At the time, GM's American headquarters wanted absolutely nothing to do with motorsport. They had pulled way back from racing. But somehow, half a world away, 2 men named Basil Van Rooyen and Jeff Mortimer talked GM South Africa into fully funding a project purely to go win races. Their starting point was the tiny, forgettable Vauxhall Forenza, and their engine of choice for this little economy car was none other than the legendary DZ302 small block V8, the exact same engine that powered the legendary Z28 Camaro back in the States. Van Rooyen and Mortimer built exactly 100 of these Z28-powered Vauxhalls, purely to satisfy racing homologation rules, and locals nicknamed it the Little Chev. This thing was absurdly fast, technically even faster on paper than the Basil Green Capri we just talked about. These were 290-plus horsepower cars weighing less than 2,500 pounds, with a claimed 0 to 60 of just 5.4 seconds, likely limited only by how much traction the tires could handle, and a top speed north of 140 miles an hour. Supposedly, one of these tiny Vauxhalls actually beat a Lamborghini Espada in a straight-up drag race, which honestly, once you know what was under the hood, is not surprising at all. But then the oil crisis hit, and continuing to build the Can-Am Forenza became completely impossible for GM South Africa. After just 1 year and only 100 cars built, that was it. The project was dead. It is rumored today that only 30 or 40 genuine survivors still exist anywhere in the world, basically like hunting for a unicorn. We are exactly halfway through this list now, and I need you to stick with me, because the next three cars are without a doubt some of the most jaw-dropping engine swaps in this entire video, and it only escalates from here. Number 4 is one of my personal favorites on this entire list, the Randall AMC Gremlin 401 XR. Back in the States, AMC's little Gremlin, basically their economy sedan with the trunk chopped off for styling, was selling extremely well, along with its slightly sportier trim, the Gremlin X, at the same time. There was a dealership called Randall AMC, essentially the Yenko of the AMC world, based down in Arizona. In 1972, Randall AMC started taking regular 304 cubic inch Vate Gremlin X's, which already had a decently sized engine for their class, and swapping in a massive 401 cubic inch motor pumping out 255 net horsepower. The result became known as the Gremlin 401 XR, with the R standing proudly for Randall. It rode on a tiny 96-inch wheelbase, measured barely 70 inches wide, and weighed somewhere around 26 to 2,700 pounds. Now, I will be honest with you, the reason this car does not rank higher on this list is that the swap itself was not quite the engineering miracle it sounds like. See, AMC's engines were all built roughly the same physical size. They never split their lineup into a small block and a big block architecture the way Chevrolet did. So if a 304 could fit in something, a 401 could fit right in there too. No drama required. They just had to source the right engine from a parts catalog or a donor vehicle and drop it straight in. But even though the install itself was fairly simple, the performance it delivered was absolutely no joke. These 401 XRs could rip through the quarter mile in the mid-13s, which was seriously impressive for the era. Between 1972 and 1974, Randall built about 20 of these strange little muscle machines, and they still stand as some of the fastest cars to ever roll off an actual AMC dealership floor, right before AMC disappeared entirely in 1987. And now, 3 cars from the finish line, I want you to really pay attention, because number 3, 2, and 1 are on a completely different level of insanity. Number 3 brings us to the legendary M-Code Dodge Dart, and just like several cars on this list, this one starts its life inside a dealership rather than a factory boardroom. Back in 1968, a man named Norm Krause of Grand Spalding Dodge stuffed a massive 440 cubic inch Magnum engine into 48 compact Dodge Darts, calling the result the Grand Spalding Special, or GSS for short. Chrysler watched this happen, quietly took notes, and the very next year decided to build it themselves as an official special order car straight from the factory. That is basically how the 1969 M-Code Dodge Dart was born. Chrysler built roughly 640 of these things, and the engine sitting in that little Dart was, in every sense, a recipe for pure violence. The top trim 440 made around 375 horsepower, paired with an absolutely earth-moving 480 foot-pounds of torque, crammed into a car that weighed only about 3,400 pounds. Honestly, by all accounts, the car felt kind of tinny and cheap. Being the humble economy platform, it started out as, but the coolest part of the whole thing was that visually, there was almost nothing separating an M-Code Dart from any other regular Dart on the road, which made it one of the greatest factory sleepers ever built. Push it hard enough though, and these things would run 12-second quarter miles all day long. And with all that real-world performance came real-world compromises. Every single one of these came with manual brakes. Air conditioning was not even offered as an option. And there simply was not enough room left under the hood for basic accessories once that giant big block was crammed in there. These were dedicated, no-frills street sleeper, and honestly, some of the best factory-built weapons available that entire model year. Now we are officially down to the final 2 cars, and I genuinely believe these are the purest, most extreme expressions of the entire big-engine small car formula ever built. So if you have made it this far, do not stop watching now. Number 2 is a car you have probably been waiting for this entire video, the 427 Shelby Cobra. Now, to be fair, plenty of Shelby cars could make a legitimate claim for a spot on this list, and you would not be wrong to argue for any of them. But this is the one I chose, because it represents the purest expression of this entire crazy idea. We are talking about a 427 cubic inch engine that is a full 7 liters of displacement, crammed into a tiny little roadster that weighed just over 2,500 pounds. That race-tuned 427 put out well over 400 horsepower and close to 500 foot-pounds of torque. To this day, a genuine 427 Cobra remains a genuinely terrifying, wickedly fast car, and by every account I have ever heard, it provides one of the most insane, visceral driving experiences a human being can strap themselves into. I have not personally driven one yet myself, but everyone who has tells the exact same story. The car itself was absolutely tiny too, with only a 90-inch wheelbase and a width of just 68 inches. But here is what separates the Cobra from literally everything else we have talked about so far on this list. This was not just a straight-line drag strip missile. The Cobra was actually engineered from the ground up to be a genuine, all-around sports car. It had proper suspension, decent steering feel, and real handling balance. Now, to be completely fair, the smaller 289 Cobras and their small block cousins did tend to handle noticeably better than the 427, simply because they carried less weight over the front wheels. But even with that trade-off, the 427 Cobra was absolutely no slouch when the road started twisting. I could genuinely spend an entire separate video diving deep into these legendary Cobras, and I probably will someday, but let's move on to the number one car on this list, because this next one might genuinely be one of the most insane, unhinged builds in the history of the automobile, period. And here we are, the number one car on this list, and this is not just any random pick. This is the single most viewed video I have ever put out on this channel. And honestly, it might be the craziest thing I have ever personally researched, the Motion Performance 454 Chevy Vega. This car is completely, utterly bonkers, and let's be honest, when you picture a serious performance car, the humble little Chevy Vega does not exactly come to mind. It was, after all, a cheap little subcompact saddled with a genuinely garbage inline four-cylinder engine. And on top of that, these things were infamous for absolutely horrific rust problems right from the factory. But then along comes Joel Rosen of Motion Performance. When customers came to him wanting a hopped-up Vega, his typical move was dropping in a 350 cubic inch V8, and for the vast majority of buyers, that was already plenty of power. But in 1972, a handful of seriously determined, seriously unreasonable customers demanded something far beyond plenty. They wanted a full 454 cubic inch big block, crammed under that tiny little hood. Now, most builders at the time believed the Vega's platform was simply too flimsy, too weak, to survive that much torque and extra weight hanging off the front end. And honestly, that is perfectly sound logic if you happen to be a normal, sensible human being. But those of us who genuinely love going fast do not operate on sound logic, do we? So Joel Rosen basically shrugged and said, why not? Let's put the 454 in there anyway. Fitting a genuine big block engine into a Vega required nothing short of full-blown surgery on the car's frame and body structure. His team had to hammer massive sections of sheet metal completely out of the way. They had to physically cut into the firewall, and they were forced to fabricate entirely custom motor mounts just to make everything fit and survive. It was an enormous, labor-intensive undertaking from start to finish, and compared to the 427 Cobra we just talked about, the Vega might as well have been a completely different animal, because this thing was even more nose-heavy. It handled like an absolute disaster around any corner, and it was really only ever built to do one single thing, go blisteringly fast in a perfectly straight line. The finished monster weighed in at around 3,100 pounds. And remember, that weight already includes an engine that was roughly 400 pounds heavier than the stock little inline 4 it replaced. But in exchange for all that added weight, it was now producing well over 450 horsepower, sometimes considerably more depending on the build. Paired with a 4-speed manual gearbox and a tall rear gear ratio, this was an absolutely perfect recipe for blowing the rear tires clean off the rims. These Motion Vegas were genuine 11-second quarter-mile machines straight off the lot. And with the right sticky tires and a little bit of serious weight reduction, I have absolutely no doubt in my mind these things were fully capable of running in the 10-second range. The only catch is, good luck ever stopping the thing, and good luck trying to turn it through even a gentle corner. Motion Performance only ever built a small handful of these V8 swapped Vegas, and out of that already tiny number, even fewer were full big block builds like this one. The kind of person who would willingly cram a 454 into a Vega back then was an incredibly rare breed of enthusiast. I genuinely wish I had better documentation on how many survive today. But Joel Rosen's record-keeping left a lot to be desired, and after his passing, tracking down accurate numbers became even harder. especially since Vegas were notorious for rusting into nothing, so plenty of these monsters likely had their engines pulled and their gutted shells left to rot away in some forgotten junkyard. And that right there is my ultimate list of the smallest, craziest little cars ever stuffed with the biggest engines humanly possible. I deliberately kept this list focused on the classic era, the 60s, 70s, and early 80s, because that golden window is where this madness thrived the hardest. Now, I genuinely want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me exactly which car was your favorite, and tell me if I missed any legendary big-engine small car builds that deserve a spot here, because there are plenty more insane stories waiting to be told. And if enough of you demand it, a part 2 is absolutely happening. If you made it all the way to the end, do me a favor, smash that like button, share this with a friend who loves cars just as much as you do, and make sure you're subscribed so you never miss the next deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay a little bit unhinged, and I will see you all in the next one. Enthusiasts.